Hi there, this is Valentine, and today I wanted to go over the process of hosting a website with AWS. I have just brought a new domain name, and I will show you step by step how to host a simple HTML and JavaScript website with AWS S3. I will go through the process of hosting a real domain, and together we're going to set up an AWS S3 bucket, upload some files, and configure everything to run properly. In the second part of the tutorial, I will show you how to automate the entire process with GitLab CI, and together we are going to build a simple CI/CD pipeline. Trust me, it is easier than you think, and automation is so important today. We will work from a Git repository, and any changes that we make will be automatically deployed to the website. But first, let's make sure that we are on the same page right from the beginning. This tutorial assumes that you have an AWS account. Hosting your files with AWS S3 does not work if your website is more complex and needs a database, or you need to run a programming language like PHP, ASPX, or anything similar. This will also not work if you're trying to host a WordPress website. This will work quite well for Angular or React projects. Hosting a website on AWS S3 also does not support HTTPS. If you need this, you need to configure AWS CloudFront in addition to what I'm showing you here. With that being said, let's jump straight into the tutorial. So I'm here at namecheap.com. This is what I use for registering and managing domains. Typically, they have very nice prices, and the interface to manage the domains, it's okay. For that reason, this is what I'm using. Generally, you don't have to use them. This tutorial will work with any domain, regardless where you have registered it with GoDaddy, Google Domains, whatever. The principle is absolutely the same. So the domain that I'm trying to use today is this one, learndevops.link. If I open up a new tab and show you the contents of this website, you will see that it's currently just hosted here on this landing page from Namecheap. Nothing special about it. So what we're going to try to do next is to create an AWS S3 bucket for this domain name. I'm here inside my AWS Management Console, and the service that I'm trying to use is S3. So I'm going to look here under Storage, and you'll see S3. And I'm going to click here on the button Create Bucket. Now you want to make sure that the bucket name is appropriate. So I'm going to type here www.learndevops.link. So this is the domain name that I'm trying to register. Select a region that is more appropriate in your case, and make sure that you remember this region, especially this part. So the technical name of the region. And after that, you can simply right here go over different settings, but simply go ahead and create a bucket. From the list of available buckets, you should be able to click on it. And of course, you will see that it's empty. Now, just a general remark, AWS has changed a lot the interface of S3, of this management part here. If you're watching this tutorial a bit later, it may look a bit different, but the principles should be automatically the same. Just a heads up on that direction. As you can see, normally at this point, we don't have no files inside here. So what I'm going to do here is first go ahead and upload the simple file. I'm going to click here on Add Files. And I'm just going to start with a simple HTML file. It just contains something like hello world. So just to test things out and make sure everything works properly. So the upload should work in a second. And additionally, what we're going to do is going to look here at properties. And somewhere here you should see static website hosting. So I'm going to click here on edit because right now it is disabled. So I'm going to enable it. I'm going to specify what is the document. So what is the index document? In my case, the index document is index.html. And I'm going to specify the exact same page also for the error document. This is also useful if you don't have an error document and you're trying to host an Angular website or React website. The index document has to be the same as the error document. We have here set up everything. This is exactly the name that we have. I'm going to click here on Save Changes. And additionally, going to permissions, you will see here that public access is being blocked at this time. So we can unblock everything. Save changes, confirm. If you're trying to get the link to this, all we have to do is go to the properties. So the properties are here. And in the section with static website hosting, this will be the temporary address that we'll have for the website. So let's click on it and see our website. Oh, that doesn't look good. What happened? Well, what happened is that we still need to figure out a few permissions. So it is not enough to simply make here this public access, but additionally we need to specify a policy. So in order to specify that policy, which will be written in JSON, I'm going to click here on bucket policy on edit, and we're going to take a look at some policy examples. The policy that we are interested in adapting is something like this: granting read-only permission to an anonymous user, because we don't know who's visiting our bucket, who's trying to get this information. So we're going to simply copy this permission from here. I'm going to go back to the management console. I'm going to paste it here. Additionally, what we're interested in is getting this resource name right. So you'll see here, AWS is making our life a bit easier. So it's providing here the exact bucket resource name. So we can simply copy this and make sure that we're not replacing everything. This is how we should look like. So you have to adapt it practically with your own domain name at this point. So let's save the changes. And you will see here now the access is in red. It's just trying to alert you that, hey, by the way, everything that you have in this bucket is public. And for that matter of fact, I don't recommend that you store anything in this bucket that is not intended to be public. So be very aware of that. If you need to store other files, don't use the website, don't use the bucket for this website for storing something else. Let's visit again the website, and you will see here my new website. It seems to be working, and this is absolutely great. Now, this is not everything that we need, because you don't want to give your customers or to anybody else an address that looks like this. You actually have bought your own domain name, and we're trying to host that. So now let's copy this. The following steps will be a bit different depending on how exactly you're managing your domain records. So I'm going back to namecheap.com, and I'm going to click here on managing this domain. What we're actually interested in is managing the DNS. So there are some DNS entry that we want to change. And what we're going to try to do is either add an alias record or a CNAME record for this domain. So I'm going to simply remove anything that is already here, because we're not interested in that. I'm going to add here a new record. I'm going to call it an alias record. This will be valid for www, and the target will be this one. So I'm going to make sure that I don't have anything like HTTP. We should start with www, should end in .com. And of course, making this change, it takes a bit until you can actually see your updated website. My advice is to check in 5 to 10 minutes to see if this change worked. But in a worst case scenario, it can even take up to 24 hours for this change to propagate. Be a bit patient, but ideally you should see something in just a few minutes. After a few refresh attempts, and sometimes it's even worth like trying out your new browser, you should be able to see now that your new website is available. So this page is then served from AWS S3. So let's look at the following thing now. You will see that this domain name has www in front of it. Now it's possible that in your case, if you're trying to visit the domain as it is, that it will not work. So if you are trying without the www, in this case it's automatically added, you may get an error page. You may get an error page from AWS saying that, hey, there's nothing configured with this domain name without the www. So if that is the case, let me show you what you need to do. So going back to the S3 console, I'm going to simply go ahead here, create a new bucket. This bucket name will be now the exact domain name, but this time without the www in front of it. And I'm going to simply go over the defaults as they are, and I'm going to create a bucket. Now the difference with this bucket is that it will not contain any files, but we still want to use AWS S3 for static website hosting. So I'm going to edit here the settings, I'm going to enable that, but this time we're going to redirect the requests to another bucket or to another domain. So in this case, we're going to enable static hosting. I'm going to redirect the request, but the host name that we're going to enter here is the domain with www, because we already know that that works. So in my case, it will be www.learndevops.link. And the protocol that we're going to choose is HTTP. As you remember, AWS S3 does not support HTTPS unless you do some additional configuration. So I'm going to save the changes here. And we should be able to get the link to this new bucket that we have created. And you will see now it's redirecting to the domain with www. In my browser, these kind of details are automatically hidden. So if you click on it, you will see here that it's still going to www. Now, still, that will not automatically work for you. You still need to add an entry. So going back here to the advanced DNS entries, we're going to add an additional entry. This will be again an alias. I'm going to use here @ and the target will be the address, again removing HTTP before that. So you will see the first entry is with www.learndevops and so on. And the second one is without www. As I said, if it isn't working automatically, you also need to do this additional step. And then it will recognize what to do in each situation. So they are practically as two different domains, but there are various points, ways to redirect from one to the other. Additionally, I wanted to set up something very important, and that is also logging. So unless you have like a no logging policy, I do recommend that you have some logs for your domains. For that reason, we are going to create a new bucket. I'm going to call the bucket www my domain name, and then simply add -logs. Leave the settings as they are and practically forget about it for a second. I'm going to go back to my bucket containing the actual website, revisit the permissions, and somewhere in these permissions you should see something like server access logging. So it will practically start writing any log requests, any access to your bucket. And it's typically a good practice to have some logs just in case something happens, to know exactly what's going on with your hosting. So I'm going to go ahead and enable that. And what we can do here is to specify our target bucket. So our target bucket will be the bucket with logs. I'm going to choose simply this one. This is the bucket name, and we can simply specify a prefix like logs or access and simply save the changes. What will happen, and this typically takes a while, you go inside this bucket, you should be able to see after a while some access files being logged there. Just forget about it right now, and we'll come back to this later to see if it properly worked. The main idea is that I highly recommend that you enable this. So now that my website is working both with and without www, and I actually managed to see everything, and I'm quite happy that everything is working properly, I want to move to the second part, and that is automating. So what I have here is essentially a project which contains HTML and JavaScript files. It is a Gatsby project that is using some JavaScript in order to dynamically build some pages. But essentially, in the end, I'll have here a public folder that contains all the HTML and all the JavaScript pages that are required. Because this is a build process, I want to automate this. I don't want to go from the CLI to be able to build everything and then to go to the website, to the server, and then to go to AWS to manually drag and drop files and things like that. What we're going to do is we're going to use GitLab CI to automate this entire build process. And I'm going to take you step by step and explain what I mean by that. Now, the first step is to go to gitlab.com and register for an account. When you are inside your account, you should be able to see something like new project. And we are going to create a blank project. So I'm going to name my project exactly as the domain name. And of course, I'm going to remove anything like HTTP and things like that. So www and my domain name. And I'm going to leave this private, and I'm not going to initialize with a readme because I already have a Git repository. So now this is the repository that has been created for my code. and I can look here at pushing an existing Git repository. So practically the command that I'm interested in is adding a new remote. And of course, what I need to do is also to push all the changes. Now, in my case, everything is working without any additional configuration because I have Git installed locally. I have configured my private key and my public key with gitlab.com. So in this case, everything is automatically integrated. If you're just getting started with this, probably easier if you will just make a copy of the project that you will find in the video description and use the interface from GitLab CI to edit those files. So if I refresh this page, we'll be able to see that now I see all my files. Just in case you want to do something from here, you can simply click on any file or click on the plus here to add a new file. And if you just want to edit something, you can click on it, click on edit, and you don't have to have Git installed and everything that I'm showing you from my IDE. So this is the website that I'm trying to deploy. It is based on React and it's using Gatsby in order to easily make some things. Not going to go very deep into that, but essentially what I have here is I have my source folder, which contains the pages and everything that I'm using here. There's also this public folder that is generated when I'm running a specific command. So let me show you what I mean by that. So for example, if I go ahead, delete the public folder and run Gatsby build, Gatsby will start regenerating this public folder. And essentially what I'm trying to deploy here is the contents of the public folder. It will contain JavaScript files that are just small enough so that they load fast, they compile and make everything good for a production environment, to put it like that. So this is essentially my build process. I'm using Gatsby to generate this public folder. And essentially many JavaScript applications nowadays have this step as well. If you're really just hosting HTML files, like you can see this one here, index.html, we have no compilation process, to put it like that. You don't need this build step. But because I need it and I want to automate it, I'm going to go ahead here and on the root part of the website, I'm going to create a new file. And you have to be careful to name this file exactly as I'm mentioning it here. So the name of the file will start with .gitlab-ci.yaml. So if you don't name it exactly as you see it here, this file will not be detected and the pipeline itself will not run. In this pipeline, I have here two simple stages. There's this build website stage. And the second stage that I have is to deploy to AWS S3. Let's start with the first one. So essentially what's happening here is that this stage, and I've indented here two spaces, just to show that everything is below build website. That's going to be part of the build stage. Additionally, because this is a project that needs NPM to install dependencies and needs Node.js to run NPM, I'm going to also use a Docker image. So I'm going to specify an image with image, and the name of the image will be Node. I'm going to use Node in version 10. Now, when I have this, I can use the script block, and inside the script block, I can add any commands that I want. So the main command that I'm interested in is npm install. This will install all the dependencies that I need. Additionally, what we're doing is we need a tool. It's called Gatsby CLI. So we're going to install that as well. It's always a good practice when you have any tools just to show the version, just to have an idea like what we are installing, especially if you're not installing a specific version. And then I'm going to do Gatsby build. So this is exact the same command that I've executed locally. So I'm trying to replicate in my CI/CD pipeline the exact same steps that I would do locally. This is practically the key to automation. As soon as you know exactly which commands you need to execute, you can easily put them inside the pipeline. So this is the build stage essentially. And because these stages are created inside Docker images, they don't share any information with one another, we also need a way to exchange this information. So practically what we did in this case is to create an artifact. So essentially our public folder is the artifact. So I'm going to define it under artifacts. Paths. So we're going to define a path to this artifact, and the path will be public. We only have this path. So we know that when Gatsby build will be executed, this public folder will be created, It's not part of our Git repository, so it's never there. And because we want to save it, after the job completes, we have to specify it as an artifact. Otherwise, when the job ends, the Docker image gets destroyed and all the information is lost. So we definitely don't want that, because we want to use this to deploy to AWS S3. Additionally, we want to keep things as separated from one another. We want to have like a big job that does everything. We want to keep things as clean as possible also. The deploy to S3, this will be part of the deploy stage. For the deploy stage, we're going to use an official image from AWS. It's called Amazon AWS CLI. This time we have to do something a bit different. So this image has a weird thing. It's called an entry point. I don't want to get too much into that, but it conflicts a bit with the way GitLab CI works with images. So we'll have to override that entry point. So in order to do that, I'm going to specify here the name, and we're going to also specify an empty entry point. So make sure that this looks exactly as you see it here. Otherwise, you will get some weird errors when you're trying to start this. At this point, what do we have? Well, we have this AWS CLI, and the AWS CLI allows us to interact with the AWS web services. But this time, we're not using the interface. This is something that will be done manually. We're using this command line interface to practically tell S3, hey, here are some files, host them for us, okay? Just to make sure everything worked properly, I'm gonna output here the version of AWS, and this is the name of the program, so it's gonna be simply AWS. And what we're doing here is I'm trying to copy all the files. So practically, we have here AWS. S3 is the service that we're trying to use. And we're saying here copy public. And you can see here that we're referencing this artifact that we have published here. So when this Docker image will be started, this folder will be also available there. Otherwise, if I don't specify it here as an artifact, it's not available here either, and the entire thing will not work. What we're doing here is we have to specify the path. So all the paths in S3 start with S3//, and then we'll have to specify the name of the bucket. We could enter here the name of the bucket as it is. I don't like to have like things that give any information about the environment itself in the pipeline. For that reason, I'm going to use here an environment variable. I'm going to simply name it S3 bucket. Make sure you put a $sign in front of it, otherwise it will not be recognized as a variable. And we're also interested in copying all the files. As you saw here in the public folder, there are a lot of files. So there are subfolders, and we don't want to copy or specify all the files. So for that reason, I'm going to use here a flag called recursive. There's still another thing that I would like to do just to feel a bit more comfortable. Probably it's not required, but I just want to start every time with an empty state of the bucket. I want to make something like AWS S3, and I want to remove practically everything that is inside the bucket before I add new files. For that reason, I'm going to simply specify here remove, and I'm going to also use this recursive flag. So this is essentially what we're doing here. We are using this official Docker image from AWS, outputting the version. We are simply deleting everything that is inside the bucket just to make sure that we don't have any conflict. And then we're copying the entire contents of the public folder. This is how the pipeline looks like, but it doesn't mean that it will work. Now, what happens here is that we need to tell AWS CLI, like, who are we? Where is the bucket? Which region is the bucket? And so on. So there's still a level of configuration. And in order to finish that configuration, we have to go back to AWS. This is the main bucket that is hosting the website. And you will see here that we have defined this region. Typically, what I recommend is that you select the region that is closer to you or closer to the intended audience, but it doesn't really matter. This has been automatically selected for me because I live in Europe, and this would be like the closest region that I have. What I'm interested in is remembering which region I am. And this is like the code for that region. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to go to GitLab CI, and we need to specify some variables just to help AWS CLI with a few things. From this left menu, you should be able to see here something like settings, CI/CD, and you will see here a block of variables. I'm going to add here a variable, and these variables will be available to the job itself. So if I start typing something like AWS, you'll already see a few variables, and we're going to use all of them. So first of all, I'm interested in the default region. The default region that I want to use is EU Central 1. So I'm going to simply add this variable. In addition, we're going to specify two other variables. Going back to AWS, we have to use a service called IAM. This is for identity management. Here in the IAM dashboard, we're going to click here on users, and we're going to create a new user that only has access to the S3 buckets. Let's call this user GitLab CI. This will help us identify what is this user supposed to do, or where are these permissions used. And very important, you need to select here programmatic access. So this gives us access to the AWS CLI. This is exactly the tool that we have inside GitLab CI. I'm going to click next on permissions, and I'm going to go the easy path of attaching an existing permission. So if I search here for S3, I will select this permission, Amazon S3 full access. This permission means that you're giving this user access to all your buckets, and essentially the user can delete all the buckets and so on. I'm just using this permission because it's just demonstrating the principle, but if you have like a lot of buckets that contain sensitive data, it may be wise to create your own policies that restrict access to only specific buckets. I'm going to click here on next. I don't have any tags, and I'm going to simply go ahead and create this user. Now, as soon as you created this user, you will see here that you have like an access key ID and also a secret access key. And I'm showing you just to have an idea like how they look like. I'm going to remove this user just after recording this tutorial. So just in case you're wondering why I'm showing you these secrets here. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to copy here the access key ID, go in GitLab CI and add a new variable. This variable will be starting here with AWS, and you can see I'm using AWS access key ID. This is a special name, and this variable will be automatically picked up by the AWS CLI when you're executing this. So all the variables will be in the environment variables, and AWS will look into, hey, is there a variable called AWS access key ID? And I will use that variable in order to establish who is trying to use AWS CLI. And the same goes with the secret. I just want to make sure that I copy the entire secret. Add variable, AWS. I'm going to paste here the value as well. I'm going to simply add it. Essentially, what we did is to establish a connection between our AWS account, the resources that we're trying to access, in this case S3, and GitLab CI, while at the same time giving only a limited access to this user. So this user will not have access, for example, to use the management interface. But through the CLI, it's possible to do many things, but they are only limited to the buckets. Practically, GitLab CI will inject this variable. So I'm going to show you in a bit how that works. So now that we have our pipeline in place, and I hope that everything is good, otherwise we'll debug it later, I'm going to simply commit this and say add pipeline. And I'm going to push the changes. As soon as I did that, if I go back to the project page, you should be able to see something like this here, like pipeline is running. And additionally, if you don't see it here or something is happening, you can go here to CI/CD pipeline. This is the first pipeline that is currently running. And you'll see it has two stages. So the first stage is simply the build stage, and the second stage is the deployment stage. See here the job build website has started. So if you want to see exactly what's going on, you can simply click on it. It will show you like what's doing currently. It's practically starting this node Docker image. After this has been started, it starts going through the commands that we have. So I'm going to go here to the overview page. I'm going to leave it for a few minutes to run. Typically, it shouldn't take more than 2 or 3 minutes. If you're coming back a few minutes later, you're looking at your pipeline. In this case, something went wrong, so that's not a problem. It's going to be a good example of trying to understand like what's going on, and anytime you're writing any scripts, things may go wrong. So what happened here is you can see the first part with the build that worked without any issues. So you'll see here that all the commands have been executed, including Gatsby build. And we can even here take a look at the job artifact. So if you click here on browse, you will see here that we have a public folder. This practically contains the entire website, but without the, for example, a GitLab CI pipeline and things like that. So only the public folder has been added here. So that definitely looks right. Let's see what happened with the second part of the pipeline, that is to deploy to S3. And I cannot stress how important it is to have this ability of looking over the console logs and to try to understand like what's going on here. So we'll see in this step, and in this case, typically like the last thing that failed is also the reason for all our troubles. In this case, you'll see that AWS is running in the sense that the CLI is available. It writes here which is the version. So that's a first step. Okay, we know that we have the right tool. And then as soon as we try to do something, so for example, we try to remove all the files from the bucket, we'll see here something like invalid bucket name, and it says empty. So essentially it says, hey, the bucket name is empty. So it is empty because I was a bit fast when trying to do this, and I have forgotten to define this variable. So as you remember, we defined other variables here in settings CI/CD, but I didn't define the bucket name. This is also a variable that is required here. So I'm going to simply click here on add variable. And the way you name it is totally up to you. It's not one of those variables that really matters how you call them. They have to match with what you're using inside your scripts here. The value that I'm using is this one. So this is the name of the bucket. So I'm going to simply click here on add variables. And because it hasn't been a problem with the pipeline script itself, I can simply go ahead here on the pipeline, on the deploy job, and click here on this retry. And you can even follow along. If you click now, you'll be able to see exactly what is happening. This only took a few seconds to run. You will see this time the job itself has passed, so everything is looking properly. Essentially, we have removed everything, and it's telling you exactly what has been removed, and then it's starting uploading. So it will go through each individual file and upload them. So just by looking at a number of the files that have been uploaded here, it does look like everything worked properly. We can go back to our domain here and click on the refresh button, and you should be able to see the website. So this is the website that I was trying to deploy. It's also a good idea to check to see if all the pages are working properly. This is it. This is how it is supposed to work. We now have everything set up through our continuous integration pipeline here. Let's make sure that we can make also a small change. So I'm going here inside the IDE. I'm going to click on the source code. I'm going to go to pages, index.html. And instead of hi people, I'm going to say something like hello world. A very small change. This indicates how easy it is later on to make changes and deploy them. So I'm going to say here changed message. I'm going to push. And of course, again, the pipeline is responsible for ensuring that I didn't break anything. So just as important is also the build process that will verify again if anything goes wrong. It will also send you an email notification if something didn't work out. So probably you can just make your changes and continue doing something else without worrying too much about this thing. So this is the power of automation altogether. Just a few minutes later, the pipeline has been successful. Let's go back to the website. It says, hi people, we refresh, and now it says, hello world. This is what it means to have a simple but very powerful continuous deployment pipeline in place. Simply takes any changes that you have and deploys them to your infrastructure. Since we're coming to the end of this tutorial, let's do a small recap of what we did so far. Going back to the AWS services, we can look back into S3. In S3, we have essentially what are 3 buckets. So one of them is the main bucket with www and the domain name. That contains all the files that we are using in the project. And essential for this, we have specified a few things, a few permissions here in regards to the public access, but also this additional configuration for the bucket policy that allows essentially anyone to get information from here. And what I typically recommend is that you don't store any other folders inside here. So essentially you could have a subfolder if you go to your configuration for properties And you can specify, if you're looking here at static website hosting, you can easily specify it in a subfolder. So you could have something like public/index.html. That would work. But the question is, what would you like to have on the root part? Because that theoretically is still accessible. So this is something that I don't recommend that you store anything else inside here, just for security reason altogether. Apart from the permission things in the properties, we have also set up here some server access logging. And to be totally honest, this has been an idea that I've seen in another tutorial from Lyred Digital. And I will link you that tutorial because I think it's an interesting alternative way on how you can do things. And they are demonstrating essentially the same process, manual process, but how to register also a domain with AWS. So just in case you don't have already a domain name, you would like to use AWS to also register the domain, that tutorial may be helpful as well. So this is the part with access logging. And as you remember, we have used another bucket in order to store the access logs. It will take a bit until the logs are available. So typically wait 24 hours to see something inside that folder. And the other bucket without the www is simply there to create this redirect. So inside here, the DNS settings, you will see here I've created this alias record. Pretty similar, you could have created a CNAME record. My understanding, I'm not an expert by any means, my understanding is that a CNAME will do another DNS lookup. So for that reason, alias record is typically faster. Correct me in the comment section if I'm saying anything that is incorrect. The way I did it here is pretty similar. For DNS, I'm using Cloudflare. They have like a very powerful interface and also power for caching and many other mechanisms. Since here the service for registering domains has allowed me to directly edit this, I didn't need anything more advanced than this one. I added it here. If you have like a specific domain register and you don't know how to do this, leave me a comment in the section below and I'll try to point you out in the right direction. Since we have established how to upload files to S3 and how to practically link S3 to a domain name, in the second part we have looked at building this pipeline. So essentially the pipeline just takes any build process that you have, if you have one, and in the second part it uses AWS CLI to automatically deploy any files that you have to S3. So essentially you don't have to log back to the S3 interface, and especially if you're already using Git for your workflows, may be a much faster solution. Thanks for sticking until the end. I know that this has been a long tutorial and hopefully you have managed to follow along. You will find the project files, including the GitLab CI pipeline, in the video description. I have integrated a continuous deployment pipeline in this example to demonstrate to you how easy it can be to automate manual tasks. If you want to learn more about automation with GitLab CI, you will find a link in the video description to my GitLab CI course. Please let me know in the comment section below if this was useful and consider subscribing for more tutorials like this one. See you next time. Bye bye.